This is Roy Thomas, and you're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 125 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. This is Rick Verbanis. I'm your host, and as always, I'm joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That's Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob, do you mind if my friend sits this one out? She's just dead.
What the? It sounds familiar. It sounds familiar.
I would be like, if one listener gets that quote, I will be impressed.
Yeah.
It was James Bond.
Uh-huh.
And it was from
Bond?
the movie. Now, I didn't do a James Bond accent. Maybe that's what I should have done.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it was from the movie Thunderball. Sean
Excellent.
Connery.
Yeah.
It was a scene where
I should have known that. I'm beating myself up now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, where it's a scene where somebody gets shot while he's dancing and puts her down. He says, "Do you mind if my friend sits this one out? She's just dead." So, why am I opening that with you today, Bob? Well, because Thunderball was a top movie for grossing in 1965. Now, 1965 also happens to be the year our guest today starts their comic career. That'd be Mr. Roy Thomas. Now, I also thought it was kind of fun that Thunderball is a Marvel character that was created in the Defenders, which was also a group, the team that Roy Thomas created. So I kind of thought that was fun.
That is fun, actually. That's a lot of connections there, Rick. And I'm disappointed. I told you I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't know that. Yeah, I don't know if you know. I was a huge James Bond fan as a kid. I have probably dozens and dozens of paperbacks, vintage paperbacks, and I also had a subscription to the James Bond fanzine, which was called Bondage. Yeah, it was a very big disappointment when I got that first issue.
I imagine your mom.
What is this?
Your mom's like, "Bobby, you got some mail."
It actually came in a manila envelope, so high expectations. But
I bet. Yeah. Well, welcome to the show, everybody. We're very excited today because we do have a very special guest. We have Mr. Roy Thomas, who is a legend in the comic community, and we were very pleased and honored that he is going to join our show and wrap some cap with us a little bit later.
This is exciting. I know you have been hunting wide and far for a long time to get Roy on the show. So kudos to you, Rick, for finally landing him. And this is really exciting to me because I grew up reading the Invaders and of course that was his baby for a very long time and has continued to be even up until just a couple of years ago with a book that he did with Jerry Ordway. So this is really exciting for me. So thank you on behalf of myself and all our listeners.
Of course. It was a labor of love, and I'm so excited that it came through. Because we've been talking about Roy Thomas for quite some time, right? We had Steve Englehart, a longtime legendary writer of Captain America, on the show back in episode 52, and he talked about his time working with his editor Roy Thomas, who basically had this thought about, hey, what was the deal with the 40s and 50s Captain America, right? Steve Rogers supposedly was frozen, and according to Avengers 4, and he asked, Steve to go ahead and come up with something. And so Steve kind of talked about it in his episodes. I highly recommend people check that out, episode 52. And then hopefully today we can get Roy to give, his side of the story too.
Yeah, I know we've got a lot of questions for him, and we'll see if he gets to them all. So you've warned me that he is a bit of a talker, so that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah, he's fun. He's fun. He definitely is not shy. You don't have to pull things out of him. He's got a wealth of great information and stories, and man, very excited to have him on the show. And he's also the king of some retcons, right? Like, and retroactive continuity, as retcon stands for. And I highly recommend for our listeners, if you want to learn about the non-obvious Captain America retcons, right? I mean, obviously Avengers 4 being the biggest one, or Bucky becoming Winter Soldier, right? These are big, obvious ones, but there's a lot of other ones out there too, and some of them that Roy Thomas was involved with. And we did do a top 10 other Captain America retcons. We've actually broke it up into 2 episodes. So check out episodes 84 and 89 for those, because Mr. Bob Lucius here put a lot of research into those, and it's pretty entertaining and interesting to see the different twists out there.
It is, and as you said, he was behind a lot of the really big ones. So it's going to be great to pick his brain about those and his philosophy about retcons, and where the thought process came up for a lot of them.
Yep. So Bob, this week in the Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group, it's been so much fun watching all of these different posts that are coming in, because people are showing off their new collections, or just some new stuff that they've picked up at flea markets, or at their local comic shop. So people filling in some of their holes, getting real close to finishing some long runs. And then you shared a couple of things as far as, like, I think you got a new Funko Pop in, didn't you?
Well, it's not a Funko. It was it's the Marvel animated. I think they're based on Scotty's illustrations of
Scotty Young.
Yeah, Scotty Young, and I got Sam Wilson, Captain America. So my mom, my wife ordered it for Father's Day last year. So it's been almost 9 months. Since she ordered it.
Could have had a baby between now and then.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. Thank goodness we didn't. But pre-ordered, so it finally arrived. So that was exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always fun seeing that kind of stuff in the Facebook group.
Mm-hmm. And you got some art, I think.
I did. I showed off some original art that I got from the Batman Captain America one shot that came out in 1997 by John Byrne. I finally joined the John Byrne Club. That's something I've been trying to do for years now, and it's hard to do because John Byrne only did like 9 issues back in 1980, 1981. And of course, he did a little bit of a run on Avengers. So, there's always those, but there's not a lot out there. So when these 2 pages came up, I jumped on them. It's the epilogue to the Batman Captain America one shot. It was pages 63 and 64. And it's the epilogue that takes place 20 years after the story. And it's where the new Batman, Dick Grayson, and Robin, Bruce Wayne Jr., are in a bat sub, and they're in the Arctic, and they come across a frozen figure in the water, and they pull it into their sub. That sounds very familiar.
It sure does.
And it's Steve Rogers, and he wakes up from the ice and he yells, "Bucky!" And then they kind of, let him know what's going on. It's just a cool 2 pages. So yeah, that I'd love the Facebook group. If listeners haven't checked it out, I highly recommend. It's unlike any other Facebook group out there. What do I mean by that? We have strict rules, right? We have very strict rules about no politics, no negativity. Let people enjoy what they like. And we enforce that too. So it's an oasis away from the daily stress, and it's a trip down memory lane. I highly recommend people check it out.
Sure is. You'll learn stuff you didn't know. You'll learn about the comic book and related collectibles, and you'll get a lot of support and a lot of help. And it's a little bit of paradise. And otherwise, at least for many people, including myself, some days can be pretty rough, and that is just a little respite.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and one more thing, Bob, I just want to mention, because we're getting low we're getting low on our What Would Cap Do challenge coin. So we made 100 of these custom-made coins that have on one side Captain America's shield. On the other side, it says, what would Cap do? And then there's a ring on both sides with different personality traits of Captain America. So it might say compassion, humility, empathy, honesty, integrity, and a few others. But anyway, we made these coins. You can't buy them. We don't sell these coins, but we do give them to our patrons, people who help support the show and support the Facebook group. If anyone has any interest in doing that, if you love the show and you want to show your support, just go to our website, CaptainAmericaComicBookFans.com, and you can see on there where you can get the What Would Cap Do challenge coin and a few other perks for being a patron as well. And we are running out. I am going to save a few for our guests because I like to give them to each and every one of our guests to come on the show. But we have a handful left for people who want to sign up to be a patron. So check that out.
You don't want to miss out on this because once they're gone.
What?
They're gone.
Oh, you left me in a lurch there. I was like, what, Bob?
Yeah.
Speaking of leaving in a lurch, we probably should get Roy Thomas out of the green room. He's probably been waiting long enough.
Indeed.
Interrompemos esse podcast para perguntar: quem você quer ser?
Designer, engenheira, pedagoga,
administrador.
Quer saber? O Senac EAD é nota máxima no MEC. Tem cursos de diversas áreas, com conteúdo elaborado por especialistas do mercado e professores mestres e doutores. Ainda tem o Senac Carreiras, conectando estudantes a vagas de emprego em todo o país. Saiba mais em ead.senac.br/graduação.
Uma pausa no seu podcast para falar sobre a beleza, essa força poderosa que nos move. No Grupo L'Oréal, nós criamos a beleza com sustentabilidade. Utilizamos em nossas embalagens 85% de plástico PET de origem reciclada. 65% dos ingredientes vieram de base biológica ou derivados de minerais abundantes. Grupo L'Oréal, nós criamos a beleza que move o mundo.
Our guest today needs no introduction, but it's hard not to list some amazing highlights from his career. Roy Thomas has been a comic book writer and editor since the mid-1960s, working closely with Stan Lee, following him as Marvel's editor-in-chief in 1972. He was pivotal in getting Marvel the rights to adapt Conan to comics, as well as the movie Star Wars. He has co-created such unforgettable comic characters as Wolverine, Vision, Carol Danvers, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Ultron, Yellow Jacket, Man-Thing, Red Sonja, Adam Warlock, Morbius, Ghost Rider. I could go on and on. He's also created amazing teams like the Defenders and Squadron Supreme. However, we plan to talk to him today about his time on the character Captain America, including the group he created, the Invaders. We are honored to have the 2011 Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame winner and 2022 Harvey Awards Hall of Fame winner, Mr. Roy Thomas. Roy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hey, if I've won all these Hall of Fame awards, you shouldn't have to introduce me at all. Everybody should know who I am.
Exactly.
But I don't think they do.
It's so hard not to brag on you. I mean, you're.
It's okay. I'll forgive you.
And also a special thank you to your manager, John Cimino, for arranging this chat. We really do appreciate that.
I don't even know how to turn on these things without him. So yeah, he's crucial.
So after being with Marvel only a year, you took over writing the Avengers from Stan Lee with issue 35 at the end of 1966. And at this time, Captain America had only been revived for like 2.5 years. The only other place you could regularly read him was in Tales of Suspense, a series he shared with Iron Man. Was it clear by this time, though, after only 2.5 years, that Cap was a top character for Marvel, or was he still building a new fan base?
Well, I think they're both true. He was because, obviously a lot of readers hadn't heard of him before Avengers #4, or maybe that Strange Tales, where the fake one was in a couple of months before. So Wow. But the thing is, at the same time, it was Captain America was such a strong character and had been from the very beginning that as soon as you brought him back, you knew he was a star. I mean, he was going to be right up there at the very least with characters like Iron Man, if not eclipsing them. He was just that good a character. I mean, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby had created, one of the handful of great superheroes back in the 40s. And, now in my case, of course, I knew a little more about him because I'd read the comics for the last few years in the 40s, although
Mhm.
not during the World War II, and I'd seen them later. And in the 50s, there was a revival for about a year, and I read all that stuff. So I was a fan, I was a fan by the time of 1966. I was already a fan for like 20 years of Captain America.
So for you, this was, I guess, something I don't want to say a dream come true, but it's a character you were a fan of that you were now writing.
Yes, I was a bigger fan in the 40s and even in the 50s, and later of both Submariner and I actually liked those two characters better. I like the Human Torch with his flames and so forth, and the Submariner with that great triangular head and the, swimming and the pointed ears and the winged feet. But Captain America was a great character, and I had been reading him since the 40s, and so it was, if it, as you say, it wasn't a dream come true, but it was certainly something that I was really very very happy and eager to do was to write to do Captain America, just like I would have been to do maybe Superman or Batman or probably more than Superman or Batman actually.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the 40s and 50s and talk about continuity in the Marvel universe. The nuances and the relative importance of continuity is always good fodder for debate among members of our Captain America comic book fans Facebook group. And in retrospect, it seems pretty obvious, like some 6 or 7 decades into the Marvel age, how attention to continuity has really helped build Marvel universe that is coherent and rich with details. So when we go back and we read the Golden Age Captain America stories, there's little attention paid to continuity. Every story stands alone, and that's basically, it wasn't an outlier, right? That was a tendency back then. They were just putting out periodicals. They weren't trying to build a universe back in the 40s and 50s. So things started to change in the 60s, and you played an early and important role shaping those changes. In a broader sense, what do you think precipitated the shift towards the importance of continuity in world building, and how has that changed how comics are read and also written?
Well, comics, the continuity, the idea of continuity in comics had become already important by the time I get there. To some extent, it was already taking effect at DC's comics. There was more continuity between let's say the various stories of the Flash and Green Lantern and Justice League than there had been of the old Flash and old Green Lantern and Justice Society back in the 40s. But still, it was like every adventure was a whole new thing and so forth. And there was a little continuity, but it was kind of weak. The characters were kind of growing, but it didn't seem like they were changing much. Stan and Jack changed that when they started. Stan, Jack, and Steve Ditko, and I think all of them had a part in that because of their natural inclinations. The person I think who sort of guided it was Stan, because after all, he was writing almost everything. And if he wasn't, he was either writing it or at the very least he was editing it. So he was overseeing the writing and the art. And Jack was involved in a lot of different books, but he wasn't paying attention to the books he didn't do. He wouldn't have probably even read an issue that was drawn by a Don Heck, you know, or I never heard him talk about Spider-Man. I don't know if he knew anything about Spider-Man once he was no longer associated with it. And Steve Ditko really only paid attention to the couple of books he did, but Stan paid attention to all of them. And because he was either writing or at least editing all of them, it was just very natural for him to make continuity happen. And it just happened. It just kind of, I don't, some of it was conscious and some of it I think was probably unconscious, that he just kind of stumbled into it and suddenly discovered that there was feedback from the readers, and they obviously liked this continuity thing. They appreciated the fact that 2 or 3 issues later there would be a footnote saying, "Remember when this happened 2 issues ago?" They thought that was kind of funny because you didn't see that in comics much. It was, they were saying these things really happened,
Mhm.
and I think that that makes the things so much more real to a reader if you're especially if you're trying to hang on to readers. And Stan from the very beginning, because he wrote a letter or two to that effect in the first year or so the Marvel thing, that he was consciously kind of, even if he wouldn't admit it maybe later, that he was really consciously aiming the comics at a slightly older readership than he felt, say, DC Comics were having than the comics it had in the past. So it wasn't just that he discovered it and built on it. He actually was wanting to from the very beginning. It worked out pretty well because what he was giving the readers was something that was a step up in terms of, quality. I mean, it wasn't that something could be done for kids and still be very good. He was doing something, but for slightly older kids, that maybe even people a little older. And he suddenly discovered he was getting things from adults like me. I was a young adult just graduating from, college and teaching. And my friend Jerry Bales was a college professor. And there were a number of others. Some of them were aspiring artists. And they were people who had read the comics in the 40s and 50s. Some of them were new, and some of them had been reading for 20 years and liked comics. And this would be very startling to people like Julius and Stan, because the theory in the old comics had been every 5 or so years, the whole audience turns over, right? The kids start reading at the age of 5 or 6, like I did, or whatever. They read till they're 10 or maybe 12. They hit puberty, they're gone. They probably never came back in the old days. You don't see a lot of people say, otherwise it would have come back and started reading Archie comics, 20 or 30 years later. But what Julie did to some extent, Stan did to a much greater effect. He grabbed those people so they never left. And as a result, you had new people coming in all the time, the young readers. And if you lost some at the end, but you didn't lose nearly as many as you would have before, so therefore your base keeps growing. And this was really, I think, the source of the thing that drove DC crazy about the time that I came there and that I would hear about, where they would have meetings. John Romita said he sat in on one of them when he was still doing romance comics there, in which they would be trying to discuss why Marvel was selling more and more comics, and of course, DC was distributing Marvel at that time through its, ARM Independent News. So they knew all the sales figures, and they just saw that Marvel, while still a smaller company and being controlled by them in a certain way, but their sales were just growing and growing while DC's were staying kind of flat, and they came up with all these theories. And John said that one of them, I might have been Canning or something, but one of the editors actually suggested it was the bad art. Guys like Kirby and Ditko, these bad artists, that the kids, it was such bad art because they, some of these guys hadn't liked Jack very much when he was doing Challenge the Unknown. It was too exciting and wild for them, and they were just as happy. Guys like Mort Weisinger were just as, the editor of Superman, they were just as happy when Jack was gone, and they liked the more bland art. They made people like Gil Kane and Carmine Infantino do much more bland art than they would otherwise have done. And they said, after all, a kid will look at this bad art over there at Marvel and they think even I can do that. And that's why they like it. Well, that's such an insane viewpoint that it's hard to think that it was actually spoken aloud in a meeting.
Wow.
And sometimes they said, oh, it's the covers, because they got all these weird purple colors and they don't have the primary colors. Stan would have all kinds of shades of purple or something and and so forth. Or it was this, or it was word balloons on the covers, or something. They have more word balloons on the covers. They do this, they do that. And I think a lot of it was just the fact that they just seemed more real, which was a combination of the excitement that Stan, Jack, and Steve and the other artists who took their cues from them put into the books. And therefore they'd come back. They wanted to know what happened the next month. I mean, you got a great book like Avengers. It's going real good with all the big guns from Marvel in it. All of a sudden they all go away and you got Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver. I mean, and Hawkeye. And people wanted to see what the hell's going to happen. Stan told me the sales actually went up in Avengers when they dumped Iron Man, Thor, and Giant Man. He says he thinks it's because kids wanted to see what the heck was going to happen to these losers running around with Captain America, And actually, for a while, the book actually sold better and it stayed pretty steady, and so forth. And I think that was true with all the books. Jack got better and better. When you look at the Fantastic Four #1, it's not that great. I mean, it's the art's kind of crude for Jack Kirby compared to what he had been doing just a year earlier, say in Challengers. You look back 2 or 3 years later, he's back to doing top level work. Mm-hmm. And once he gets teamed up with inkers like Coletta and Thor, or Joe Sinnott on Fantastic Four, you've just got something that moves it to a whole new level.
Yeah. So I'd like to take this concept of continuity a step further. So a few things seem to get Captain America comic book fans more riled up than retroactive continuity or retcons, especially when they involve the more, let's just say, the sacrosanct elements of the Captain America mythos, like his origin story or the major milestones of his life.
Bucky should have stayed dead. That's my theory. Winter Soldier, the hell with him. Bucky should have. There used to be a saying at Marvel: Marvel Comics will be successful and thrive as long as Bucky stays dead. Well, they're doing okay.
Yeah,
I
and
doing
Uncle
all
Ben,
right.
right?
Go ahead.
For some, retcons needlessly muddy the water by answering questions that nobody's asked. Well, for others, retcons are just what are needed to address these nagging gaps in continuity. So these debates, they periodically arise in our Facebook group, particularly with retcons connected to the identity of the guy behind Cap's cowl. So in podcast number 6, we covered the Captain America 153 to 156 story arc, the one that finally explained who was slinging the shield in those 16 Captain America stories in the 1950s.
Yeah.
We talked to the writer of that arc, Steve Englehart, back in podcast episode 52. And in podcast episode 124, we covered What If number 4, which you wrote. And that issue revealed that the Captain America we saw in Captain America comics in the 1940s and was in fact 3 different men.
And did Steve mention that I'm the one who assigned him and asked him to do the 1950s Captain America?
He did. Yeah, he did.
I figured he would. Yeah. Actually, I assigned him. I wanted him to do. Here's the thing. It bothered me as a reader of the longtime comics, even though I wasn't a slavish enslaved to continuity going back to the 40s necessarily. Even when I did Invaders, I didn't always follow the old continuity. I wasn't going to be religious about that. But it had bothered me when Stan and Jack brought back Captain America and Avengers number 4 that, they had him frozen in ice since 1945 because I knew he had lived for several more years till 49 in the comics. Then he had disappeared. Then he had come back to fight the commies in 54 for about a year. And then he was gone again. So he was back. So it bothered me. And also we were even reprinting those stories. You remember there was Marvel Collector's Item Classics. We were reprinting, and I was responsible. I wanted to reprint them. We found black and white proofs of some of them. And some of them we had to wash out the color, but some of them we actually had proofs of. We were reprinting the old Captain America, Submariner, Human Torch stories. And I wanted to bring them in some way, but I had to find a way to do it. So I came up with the general idea, and just, I didn't give that much to Steve. Well, Steve, I don't know if he deliberately did it or it was just misunderstood or, didn't care. It doesn't matter. Instead of doing the whole thing that I had hoped he would do, which is to take care of from 1945 to 1955 back in there, he just did the 50s version. And everything. And so that left, and that's the reason that other book, the What If, was done by me later, because when Steve was done, had done a very fine, interesting job with his issues, and they sold very well and they aroused a lot of interest. There was still that whole late 40s period and so forth. So I ended up deciding that I would do a story in What If, which really wasn't a What If story. And I said so at the time. This is actually a story that counts as happening. It was kind of cheating a little bit to say, oh, this story actually happened, as opposed to all the other comic book stories. But there it was. It's interesting. Otherwise, I left Steve alone. Like I myself would not have had Captain America be a crazy right winger, and so forth, and got kind of nuts. I wouldn't have done that. I liked that 50s Captain America too much to have done that to him. But I gave Steve the assignment, not me. So if Steve wanted to do that, that's okay with me. To me, that character and the character in the 50s comics are still 2 different characters, because I can't reconcile what Steve did, good as it was, with these other characters that I love, because I love Romita's art. My favorite Romita art is not Spider-Man. It's Captain America in the 1950s. If I had one page of Romita artwork that I could have, it would be Captain America from the 50s, not Spider-Man, much as I like his Spider-Man. So, but that was okay. And, somebody else would have done something else to do that. So other people would have said, let's just ignore. Stan would have just gone on ignoring the whole thing forever and just said those stories didn't happen. But he didn't mind, if I could handle it and if Steve could handle it, that was fine with him.
You mentioned the fact that you weren't slavish, right? You're not slavish about the continuity with the 40s and 50s. And, one of the things that seems to bother a lot of people is that, when, for example, the 1950s Cap is retconned as William Burnside and his Bucky is Jack Monroe, that somehow it undermines what the intention was of the creative teams who worked on those stories at the time, because they thought they were, obviously drawing Steve Rogers, right? How do you respond to that sort of folks? It's criticism, right? A criticism of the approach.
I have one quote on that. It's a goddamn comic book. That's what it is. And so, and it's and what Steve wrote. What I hate to bust anybody's groove, but this is fiction,
right,
and so forth. And I agree. You want to take it seriously, but my feeling has always been, really, if the people who are writing and drawing the comics don't take the continuity seriously, I don't mean slavishly necessarily, but fairly seriously, then why the hell should I come back a month later and read another adventure about the same person and take that seriously if the people writing and drawing it act as if, as soon as the story happens, it evaporates and it may have never happened. But there is a real problem, as I just said, not knowing what your experience with it was. I had just said that I can never reconcile in my mind the Steve Rogers and Bucky that I knew in Romita drawing and other whoever wrote. He thought Stan wrote some of them in 1954, 53, and 54. I could never reconcile that with the character that was going to throttle Nixon in the White House or whatever Steve had in mind. But I accept that what Steve did was a great story. It isn't my idea for the kind of story that I would have done for that thing, but I can't argue. I couldn't have done anything that would have been any more popular. I'd have been lucky if what I wrote would have been half as popular as what Steve did. And so we just did it, and then we just ignored it. But I got to admit, it's sort of, I can keep thinking, gee, who'd want to read those old stories now and think this is some nut? He just hasn't got quite nutty enough yet in the 50s. The 40s were a little easier because there wasn't that much, happening then. Yeah. But even there, you've got the fact that, it's supposed to be the Patriot who became the Captain America of the late 40s. And I think I actually killed off one of my own characters in that What If. Then I had made up that Spirit of 76.
Right. Yeah.
So that
and then I figured, well, so I just killed him off and had the Patriot, because I think the Patriot lasted in comics only to about 46. So it sort of makes sense. He could have come in and taken Captain America's place. And I tied it with Jack Kennedy and an android and a lot of stuff like that. Yeah. Just had a good time doing it with Frank Robbins. Steve had a good time doing it with his. It all sold pretty well, so everybody's happy, except the people that say, that's not my Captain America of 1955. And I understand their viewpoint completely, but there's nothing to be done. It's just a comic book,
Yeah.
It's actually kind of funny. It's like history repeats itself. People are saying that's not my Captain America. We're hearing that nowadays with the current stories of Captain America. So history repeats itself. Fans are, they love what they love. Getting back to that What If number 4, and Bob mentioned we just covered that last episode. We covered it panel by panel, and it's an amazing story of this retcon that you had done. But one of our Patreon listeners, Grant Ball, he submitted this question for you, and he said, in that What If number 4, we see William Naslund take over as Captain America, only to die shortly thereafter, and then replaced by Jeff Mace. He wants to know, what was the purpose in having 2 different people take over as Cap during this time rather than just one of them?
Well, I felt I'd like to get some tragedy in the story. If all that happens is, okay, Captain America, everybody already knows Captain America has disappeared and presumed dead since 45. So that's no great story point. But if I bring in another Captain America and then suddenly surprise people by killing him off, you want to shock people, poke them in the eye a little bit and do something they weren't expecting. I could have just brought in the Patriot right away and had him continue to be it, or something else. But I just thought it would be just good to surprise people a little bit. And obviously it worked. And, somebody else could have done it differently. They could have done it better. They could have done it worse. But that's it. And that's sort of that's as much part of Marvel continuity now as, say, the story that Steve did. They don't contradict each other. Because even though I had a different thing in mind for the 50s Cap than what Steve did, the fact remains, once he did that, to me, that was canon. And there's no reason not to have it be canon. And I just tried to work with it and do another story around it. is the character that went crazy? Is that the Patriot, or is it
It's William Burnside.
Yeah, different William. Yeah, William.
So
Burnside.
he's not even the Patriot or Spirit of '76, right?
No.
So you had 3 Captain Americas in that period in a way.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Roy, because you brought the Patriot, Jeff Mace, back in Marvel Premiere 29, which had the Liberty Legion. Great 3-book series that crossed over with the Invaders. And then you introduced William Naslund in Invaders 14. And at least one of those books came out. He was one of the Crusaders.
William Naslund, that's the Spirit of 76.
The Spirit of 76.
Right. I forgot his civilian name. Yeah.
So, I think...
But he's not the one that became the Captain America in Steve Englehart's book.
No, different.
Yeah, that was a third guy.
Third guy.
That's the third guy.
So
I don't know where he dug him up. That's Steve.
Just made that up.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think he was identified by name till much later.
Oh, I see.
But in any case, so one of those books came out a good 6 months before What If #4, and of course the Liberty Legion story it came out over a year before. So I was curious, how long were you playing with this idea? I mean, had you planned to already use those 2 characters in your What If retcon, or was it just a happenstance?
I don't know. I really don't. I knew that I wanted to deal with the stuff that Steve hadn't done without undoing what he did. And everything, even if I would have done, even if I would have preferred he'd done it, differently from a personal viewpoint. From a professional or commercial viewpoint, I can't argue with him at all because he did it great. It's so, but I don't think I think it was on my mind that I wanted to do something about that. I think it had been on my, first of all, I think it had been on my mind ever since I saw Captain America #4 in a way, when I wasn't even a professional, simply because I saw it and, I said, it upset my sensibility of continuity. And I wanted to take care of that. I like continuity. Stan liked continuity. He wouldn't have bothered with this bit of continuity, but that was my special. He had the bits of continuity he liked to take care of, and I had the ones I wanted to take care of. And as long as they didn't get in the way of each other and they sold some comics, that was, basically fine with him. So I think I was always kind of looking for a chance. I don't mean I was actively seeking it exactly, but I was always ready for a chance to do it, because after all, if I weren't, would I later have asked Steve to do what he did, to take over that thing and do something? So basically, it was just an idea that was in my head, and whenever the chance came up, it wasn't that I was looking for a chance. It's just that it's there on the back burner of my mind, and when a chance comes up, all of a sudden, when I founded the What If book, I didn't think in terms of doing that story, but as soon as I did 1 or 2, it suddenly occurred to me I was going to violate the whole premise of What If to get in a story I wanted to do before it got too far in. And everything. I made sure I said that it was canonical because, I wanted to kind of make it as difficult as possible for other people to undo it later on. I mean, anybody can do anything at Marvel if they really want to, but I wanted to make it tricky by saying this is real. This is not a What If story. It just happens to be appearing in the What If book.
So I've been excited to talk to you about the Invaders series. So when you launched the Invaders series with giant-sized Invaders #1 in mid-1975, World War II was already by that point more than 30 years behind the readership and receding further and further with each year. And of course, several of the Tales of Suspense stories featuring Cap involved World War II stories with Bucky, but those ended with Tales of Suspense 71, as Cap's wartime adventures gave way to his contemporary Man Out of Time stories. So what was the Invaders pitch, and why did you think that World War II stories with a resurrected all-winners squad would resonate with a younger generation of readers, especially as the nation was just getting out of Vietnam at that time?
Well, I didn't know. This is the beginning of the period. Remember, I had just left being editor-in-chief, right? When I made up this idea for Stan, it was within a few days that I took the idea of the Invaders and Stan after I had stepped down as editor-in-chief. And the basic thing was, when I left being editor-in-chief, something happened inside me, and I've never again cared that much about the idea of commercial comic books. I mean, you got to sell enough comics to keep things going and this and that. But from then on, all I ever really cared about was doing what I wanted to do, try to do it in a way that people would buy enough comics that the editors and publishers would leave me alone. That's all I really wanted. I wanted so that Stan would be happy and the publisher would be happy, if it was Stan or somebody else. And I didn't really, I mean, I wanted to sell comic books. We weren't on a royalty system, so it didn't bother me that much if I sold as many comic books as maybe I had when I was doing Avengers or something like that. They just had to sell enough comic books to get by. So therefore, commerciality was not at the top most of my mind when I came up with the idea of the Invaders, but it wasn't at the bottom either, because I figured, well, here's a book. I explained this to Stan. This was my pitch, was that, if you got a book with Captain America as one of the stars, and you got the other Human Torch who had been introduced once before, and he still looks like the other Human Torch, so that'll bring in people who like the Fantastic Four, even if they discover it's a different one. And the Submariner had a series. You got these three guys, but you just have them in a different time period. But the reason for it was that I wanted to stay the hell away from Marvel continuity and the Marvel mainstream. I had gotten so used to writing the stuff I wanted to write, like the Conan books that were totally outside Marvel's mainstream continuity. I mean, they were so far back, and I wouldn't let anybody else use Conan. So therefore, I wanted to find other stuff that kept everybody away from me. I just wanted my own little world. I would pay attention to what was going on at Marvel. They could pay attention to one of me, but I didn't want something where I had to call them and say, what's Captain America doing this month? Or what's this guy doing this month? Or what's Spider-Man doing? I wanted something where this happened 20, 30, 40 years before. So none of your business what's happening in there. As long as it's consistent and doesn't undermine what's happening in Marvel today, I should be left alone. So I went to Stan and told him this. And since it had those three characters in it, and since he had done a few stories like that, though I don't think he would have really ever come up with the idea of a regular. Remember, he had come up with the idea of Sergeant Fury, and when it was already 20 years in the past.
That's true.
And he had done those Captain America stories with Jack, but that was mainly because he didn't want to interfere with the continuity and so forth of what was going on in the Avengers. So he was looking for something that, was kind of out of the way for a while. But in my case, I just told him, I said, we could do this book set in the past, and I wanted it so that I could have my own little world, and everything, and nobody was going to, bother me about it. But the thing I knew is that Stan is not going to let me call this the All Winners Squad. That was just a name that came up. Never, they never even had a real logo, and it was just a name that came up because of the name of the book was All Winners, and it wasn't a very good name for a group. What's the All Winners Squad? So I gave it to Truman to suggest that in What If #4, of course, and. So I said, I have to come up with a new name. Well, you may recall that back in one of the last couple of issues of Tales to Astonish, before Hulk and Submariner went off into a series of their own, they had a big full issue battle that Stan and Marie Severin did. Was it number 100, 101, something like that? A whole full battle, Submariner versus the Hulk. And Stan, when that sold like crazy, Stan had for about 3 days, he had this idea. He wanted to do a book that had the Hulk and Submariner together every issue. And it was going to be called The Invaders. And he quickly gave up on that idea. I believe he just thought, hey, if you have them fight every issue, it's not going to be so special, so they can't just fight every issue. So he gave up on that. He never went any further. But in the meantime, he'd had this idea for a comic called The Invaders. And this is, I think, before the TV show. And then the TV show came along and it vanished. So that wasn't a problem anymore. So without mentioning Stan, I went into Stan and I told him this idea. And he said, well, that's good. What do you want to call it? And I said, well, I got a great name. I said, The Invaders. And Stan looked at me and said, I like that name. I didn't bother telling him it was his, that he had come up with it several years earlier. He was still liked it. I just felt, if he thinks I made up this name instead of him, that's okay with me. So I had a good name because, he likes strong names like the Avengers and the Invaders. In fact, I never liked the Defenders much. I felt it was too passive. But Avengers and Invaders, those are better names to me. And so I had this book, and then I was allowed to just go off and, do what I want to do. And it sold for a little while, and then it kind of withered on the vine, and I had other editors, so I didn't write all of them and probably didn't oversee them as carefully as I could. Otherwise, I like to think it would have lasted a lot longer than 40 or so issues, because it definitely deserved to.
One of the favorite books in my collection is Invaders Annual #1 from August 1977.
You have good taste.
It's got 3 great tales that give the other side of the story that we read in Avengers 71. This one from the Invaders' perspective. But the real treat is that cover by none other than the legendary Alex Schomburg, who also pencils the Human Torch story in this issue. I think this might have been his last work for Marvel. This issue also featured a Submariner story penciled by Lee Elias, famous for his work on the 1940s Black Cat comic.
And who did Submariner
for a while.
Right.
Yep. And a Cap story penciled by Don Rico, who worked on several Cap books in the 40s and 50s, two other legendary Golden Age artists. So I have to ask, what's the backstory here? How were you able to recruit such amazing Golden Age talents to participate in that issue?
Well, call it a skill. I don't know. Basically, you just have the idea. The thing was, I wanted to do something a little different. I could have had Frank Robbins draw the whole book and everything, and but the thing is, I love the Justice Society, the old series at DC from the 40s. That's my favorite comic book of all time. And they'd have the characters at the beginning, together at the beginning and end, and in the middle they would have separate chapters, at least in the prime of the book, penciled usually by the guy who penciled the regular book. Joe Kubert would draw Hawkman, and Paul Reinman would draw Green Lantern that he was drawing in a book, and the Flash artist, including sometimes Elias, would draw the Flash, things like that. And I wanted to do a book like that because I said I want to do an All-Star Comics type book at Marvel, and I'd already done it in a way with aspects of What If and so forth. So I decided I'm going to try to get somebody who worked on the 40s characters to do the book. And one of the first things I did go to was Alex Schomburg, because he had done all those great covers with all the death rays labeled and everything like that. And he did a fine cover. The code made us take a spot of blood out of it when Nazi was bleeding, but otherwise it's exactly as he drew it. And that was nice, but he was only going to do the covers because I don't know if he ever did any interior art for Marvel. He did some for other companies like the Standard Group, but I don't know if he ever drew much of anything for Marvel or Timely in those days, just covers. But anyway, so I had Carl Burgos was going to do the Human Torch. And I never met Carl Burgos in my life, but I did talk to him on the phone once or twice, and he said he'd do it. And then because he really, I don't know, he was just so unhappy with Stan and Goodman because they had brought back the Human Torch, the original Human Torch, in that FF annual, probably to secure the rights and make sure they had that Human Torch too, that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And it was nothing personal with me. We didn't know each other, but he just said, I can't bring myself to do it. So he begged off over the phone. I was kind of crushed. And in the meantime, I had gone to Don Rico. In some ways, I would have, if I could have, I might have liked to go to Romita because he didn't draw it in the 40s, but he drew it in the 50s. I couldn't get Kirby, at the time, and so forth. And who around there was there? So, but I knew Don Rico slightly, because I was living in L.A. By that time, and I had met Don Rico, and we were, mild friends. And I knew he drew. It wasn't something he did a lot of, but I said he could draw a story if he wanted to, and he seemed interested. And Lee Elias, again, I never met the man. And I remember he hated the Submariner, by the way. He said awful things about him in an interview I read sometime. He said it was an awful fish character. He said, I just hated him. And he had been hired to try to modernize the character. He did a few issues, and then somehow he felt they gave it to other people so they wouldn't have to pay his rate or something. He had a very bad experience at Timely back in the late 40s when he did that, evidently. But he was willing to come in and at least pencil it, And so I was happy. I had two of the artists, but what am I going to do about the Human Torch? I could have maybe got Dick Ayers, who again had drawn it in the 50s, but that isn't the 40s. And I didn't know anybody else much around who had done the Human Torch in the 40s. And then it occurred to me, Schomburg did all those covers with the Human Torch on them. So I asked him, how would you like to draw? What about drawing a 5 or 6 page chapter of the Human Torch, just for the heck of it, and so forth. I had a little plot for him. And, he had never worked much on comics for Marvel, let alone work what they call Marvel style for the plot. But he did it. He did it beautifully. And so I was just on heaven. I had Carl Burgos, Lee Elias, and Don Rico drawing those 3 characters in what became the, an origin story of sorts for, I don't know, was that for the All Winners Squad at the end? Was that the issue, or was it What If, in which Truman named them the All Winners Squad? I can't remember. That was probably the one.
I think.
Yeah, but anyway, it was But I was, and of course, in my mind, all this stuff was tied together. The nice thing about Marvel was it was a small enough, big as it was by that stage, there was still a small enough feeling about it. A half a dozen or a dozen writers were writing everything, especially the major books. There's myself, Jerry Conway, Len Wein, a couple other people. Stan wasn't writing much anymore.
You were putting out like 5 to 7 books a month. I mean, you were like a machine.
Yeah, well, what do you mean like a machine? I wasn't a machine. I never slept, but I was a machine. But now I'm a machine too. I'm just running down, But yeah, because I was at earlier when I was editor chief. Of course, I had to work 40 hours or so a week at the office and then do all my writing, at home. So I was working 50, 60, 70 hours a week and of the thing. And probably the reason I'm on my second wife, I'm lucky I'm not on my 10th, probably, But anyway, it was a backbreaking job. Now, of course, I was out in LA and at least, I was just doing the writing, but also I had the temptation of a whole different lifestyle. So in some ways, I was less interested in writing comics in the latter 70s than I was, before. It's amazing to me anything I turned out was any good at all, if by anybody's standard, because I was more interested in dating. I'd gone through a divorce, so I was interested in dating. I met Dan in 77, and that took care of that. And I had, and I was trying to find other aspects of a new life. I was even, looking into doing some TV writing. I had an agent, and I'd go to meetings for that, and eventually got into some movie writing and so forth. So, comic books, I loved them, but I was probably once I left being the editor in chief, I was less interested in writing comics probably than I had been before. But so I would try to come up with things that would enthuse me. And one thing that would enthuse me was Conan, so I kept that. And another thing that enthused me a lot was the Invaders. And in fact, I liked it so much. Then I came up with the Liberty Legion, and that was actually several pages were drawn of a first issue of the Liberty Legion by Don Heck, but the Invaders sales weren't quite strong enough that Stan would try that. So those pages were eventually worked into a later issues of the Invaders. The Liberty Legion was an idea when I was like 10 or 11 years old. I had made up a group called the Liberty Legion and drawn my own 50-page all-star comics type of comic about it. And then I had made up another Liberty Legion in about 1955 that was like a cross-company thing. I drew one story. It had Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Submariner, who was the only one of the timely characters still left in 55. The other two had died. And there was Slugger of the Little Wise Guys, and Crime Buster, and Black Hawk, and Plastic Man. I put them all together in one thing I call actually Marvel Comics, starring the Liberty Legion. I did this one story, colored it, and everything of that. So this was actually my third Liberty Legion. By the time the one that came out at Marvel was my third Liberty Legion.
I think we would all love to see what you did back when you were a kid at some point. I do have a quick Avengers question for you, because you spent so much time on the Avengers. In Avengers 56, which was Death Be Not Proud, you wrote a story of Cap and the Avengers using Dr. Doom's time machine to go back and watch that fateful day when Cap and Bucky fell off the drone plane by Baron Zemo, and Cap just had to be sure his partner was actually dead. And I don't believe we've seen this story fleshed out before. What inspired you to revisit this era and provide the backstory of Bucky's death?
Got to do something. I was interested in that. I thought, well, why not see what happened? I mean, it had been such a 2 or 3 panel sequence in Avengers #4, so I figured let's go back and see more detail. I really think I blew it in a way because, because I made one of the main elements of it a bunch of these giant robots or androids that Zemo has made up, and if you've got all those somehow, I don't know, it's kind of warps the story. I feel I probably should have left them out. Other than that, I was fairly proud of the story, and I swiped a quote from Milton, for the title, and I was not the first person to have used that title, of course, to swipe it from Milton, and I was real proud. That was just a period when I was having a lot of ideas that were a lot of fun, because the very next issue was the first Vision story, I think, and so I mean, it was just. Sometimes you kind of get on a roll, and, for several months, all of a sudden you're writing stories that each one seems like not necessarily better than the others or whatever, but, suddenly they seem all right. And then you go through another period where you have several issues and none of them seem to stand out particularly. We all have the ups and downs. I was, maybe just getting started on a bit of a roll, and John Buscema provided such beautiful artwork, for these stories. That I mean, I was always constantly inspired by John's artwork because he could just draw so beautifully.
Indeed.
I was disappointed when the volume 1 of the Invaders ended with issue 41, and I was excited to see the 4-issue miniseries that popped up in the 1990s when Mike Rockwitz was the editor.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we saw the giant size Invaders #2 in 2005, and your more recent collaboration with Jerry Ordway on the Bahamas Triangle Captain America Invader story, which was absolutely magnificent.
Oh, thank you.
And so might we see any more Invaders stories in the future that you're involved with?
If I had my druthers, I would be writing a monthly Invaders comic. I mean, grant you, even more so, I'd be writing a monthly All-Star Squadron. I won't deny that, and so forth. And I wouldn't mind writing a monthly Conan. But of the Marvel superheroes, if there was one thing I could do, I would, not talking about royalties or anything like that, I would want to do an Invaders book, and just pick up where the story left off. Because mostly I tried to keep them in order. The stories in the 90s edition of Invaders took place not too long after where the book kind of dropped off. And I think I even think the Bahamas Triangle story picked up about that point and so forth. But at this case, I wanted to do a story where they hadn't met yet, so I moved that back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But all they would have to do is give me an assignment. But they obviously have so many brilliant things going. They haven't got room for one of the people who created 5 or 6 of their major series years ago.
Well, we'll see if I'll see who I can call.
Thank you. Tell me there's this guy being wasted in the wilds of South Carolina who just loved to write a monthly Invaders book.
You got it.
Yeah.
So one last from me is speaking of What If, right? You created the idea of What If, and you created the What If series and wrote several of the stories and some amazing stories. We've got a What If for you. What if Roy Thomas had never gotten into comics? What would he have become?
God, a frustrated college professor, probably. because when I took the job at DC, I had just a few weeks before gotten a fellowship through the Scottish Rite Lodge through a friend of mine to study foreign relations as graduate work at George Washington University in Washington D.C. Now I'd had to work my way through because I didn't have any money to support myself. Well, I would have either become a college professor or a diplomat, or as Woody Allen used to say, in case of war, I'm a hostage. That's something like that. And Stan said once in a thing, he says, the way Roy likes to shoot his mouth off, he'd have probably started World War III if he got into that. And but that's basically it. About a year before, although I had no training for this either, I had wanted to be an Egyptologist, and I was accepted through a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, another Washington, to study at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute, which is one of the top schools in the world for Egyptologists. And I had no background or particular knowledge, but I didn't want to be a high school teacher, and I thought Egyptology might be fun, but I didn't have any money if I had money, I'd have been an Egyptologist. So probably Egyptology's loss is comic books' loss, but it would have been something academic. I'd have probably, I don't know. I'm not a natural academic, but I could have been an academic. I could have been a contender.
So what is keeping you busy nowadays? Do you have any upcoming projects you can share with the listeners?
Well, of course, I still publish my comics history magazine, Alter Ego, every couple of months. I've got one issue coming up on Neil Adams in a few weeks. It'll be kind of interesting, and his ghost will probably come down and strike me. But loved working with Neil, and I'm working on my autobiography. Finally started it a few weeks ago. I don't know if it'll, God knows when it'll be. But in the meantime, I do books for a few publishers, do either introduction or putting together. And 2 things I'm particularly happy with now is one of them is for the Folio Society, which is in England. They work with Shakespeare and other things. I've now done about 9 volumes that have come out, and there's at least 1 or so more in the works, which are like picking up the selections of the best of either the best of the Golden Age or the one volume you probably have seen it, the best of Captain America.
Yeah, you picked out 10 stories for that. Yeah, came out for the 80th anniversary.
Then I've done. There's been Thor and Spider-Man, and the latest one that just is coming out or has come out is Doctor Strange, just now coming out. And so I've done that. I select the stories and write an introduction. Another Well, they don't have visual, so yeah, but anyway, he's handing me a book, but I said, well, they can't see it. I could pound on the cover. Yeah, we show them. Yeah, show them. This is the other
Oh, the
Oh,
value
wow.
stamps.
See, it's pretty thick. This is a book from Abrams Books. Charlie Kochman is the editor. Abrams has been doing a lot of stuff with Marvel, lately. And I had a hand in a couple of them. There was a black light poster thing and a couple of other things.
Mm-hmm.
This is a book that's going to come out in the next couple of weeks or so. I think it's called Marvel Value Stamps: A Visual History. I mean, and if there was one
Nice.
thing I hated Marvel Comics in 1973
Yeah.
and 74, it was Marvel Value
Right.
Stamps, because it would make people cut up there's the comics. But that was Stan's idea, and he rammed it down our throats, and we had to do it. And this book should really be a lousy book because I hate the stamp. It's just a bunch of pictures on stamps. But they took it and they've made a several 100-page book out of it. They show the say the letters page in which the stamp appeared of the 100, the first 100 stamps, others. And then they had a second set later with which you put a bunch together like a puzzle to make a picture. And on the opposite page, they show the page of the comic book cover or whatever from which that picture was taken.
Oh,
That's really cool.
It's put on there
Yeah.
sometimes rearranged or a new head put on or something. And I wrote a couple of notes on that too. And I wrote a rather lengthy 20 or 30 page introduction about how much I hated Marvel Value Stamps, but the way it came. And I think I had fun laughing the whole time I was doing this. Even my wife thought it was funny, and she doesn't always like my sense of humor. So I'm really happy about that. And I think people will enjoy that, even if they, whether they know anything or care anything about Marvel Value Stamps. So between that and the Folio Society books and the autobiography, I've written about. I started only a couple of months ago, and I only write it, my spare time. So I've written only about 20,000 words of it so far, and I'm still in the 8th grade. But someday this book will come out. It'll be some humongous book that nobody will buy, but it'll be there anyway.
Well, I highly recommend the listeners do check out the Folio Society because that Captain America slipcase that you worked on, because you did the introduction, and then you picked out 10 different Captain America stories that meant something to you. That was one of the questions we didn't get to.
My manager wants me to mention that he was one of the 4 or 5 advisors. I have several because the thing is, I know through the 60s, 70s, maybe a little later, I've seen this stuff. But although I collected some comics and I see them, I know who the major writers are and this and that. I don't really, I haven't really read comics that steadily for some years. I love the medium. I just don't read them as much anymore. I tend to read more history and biography. So I needed some help. So I got John Sabino and 3 or 4 other people around the world, including in England and Australia, to suggest their pick, that I would, make the choice from among them and what I thought and what I heard of other places and what they thought. So it becomes kind of a joint effort. But I'm very pleased to put those, books together. And we go all the way through Captain America #1, to a real long 20-something page story that Stan wrote when he took over the book in the 40s when Jack and Joe left, and then it ends up with, and then of course it's got Avengers #4 in it. It's got a chapter of Steve Englehart's 50s Captain America in it. It's got 2 or 3 other good stories by Roger Stern, and it's got that wonderful thing Stern and John Byrne did together, retelling the origin of Cap so wonderfully, which I utilized again in that Bahamas Triangle story. And it ends up with this award-winning story where Gene Colan they colored his pencils on a story with World War II vampires. So we were back to World War II by the end of the thing.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, and it's so well put together. The Folio Society, it's just high quality stuff. So looking forward to the other characters that you're doing there, and highly recommend our listeners check those out.
Can you believe that the suits up at Marvel 20, 30 years ago, they were always telling me, nobody is, he says, they said nobody is ever going to pay good money for a hardbound, comic book, a collection of old comic books. Can you, I mean, if you can see my shelf right now, I think those guys would faint dead away,
Right. Yeah. Any of our shelves for that matter.
Yes.
Well, Roy, we really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a tremendous honor wrapping Cap with you.
A real privilege.
Good. Rap with Cap or Yap with Cap or whatever they call it. I always wanted to call it Star Spangled Banter, but I never got around to that.
Oh, Note to self. Maybe,
like that.
Bob, we might need to use that in the
I
future.
know. I like that one.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, all right. That was a lot of fun having the legendary Roy Thomas on the show, Bob. Was it everything you hoped it would be?
It was. I mean, I wish we'd had more time with him, Rick. I could have sat there for 2 or 3 hours talking to Roy and had a lot more questions, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to ask the ones that we did. And I'm glad he was so loquacious, right? I mean, he didn't hold back, and we didn't have to pull stuff from him. He was just really conversational. So that was really amazing.
Yeah, he's a true gentleman as well as a true professional, and certainly do look forward to seeing some of those portfolios that he works hard on, with the Folio Society. So those sound really cool. And he also there's a Roy Thomas Facebook group. I would say, if people are fans of his stuff and want to go down a trip down memory lane like they do with our Facebook group, the Captain America comic book fans, there is a Roy Thomas Facebook group as well that his manager John Cimino runs. So check that out. That's a lot of fun.
I'll have to check that. I wasn't aware of that myself, so thank you for that.
Absolutely. All right. So next episode, Bob, we're going back to Dimension Z. We kicked this off with episode 122, and it's going to be a 10-part series. And we're going to get into part 2, which is Castaway and Dimension Z part 2. That's from Captain America Volume 7 by Rick Remender and John Romita Jr. and Klaus Janson. And it's a really cool story that really does change Steve Rogers' life, as well as Sharon Carter for good. So it's a cool story. So we'll be coming back to that next episode.
Looking forward to that. It's a great read.
Absolutely. All right, Bob, as always, it's been fun wrapping cap with you.
Okay, let's do it again next week, Rick.
Or should I say Star Spangled Banter?
Oh, I love that.
We're going to have to use that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis, and you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.